What are the potential ramifications of yet another military intervention? This one against Iran, an additional one against Iran. Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that you all know brings you the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to be with you and our viewers and listeners.
All right, Richard, so at the risk of being somewhat trite, here we go again. We've got an armada forming over near Iran. Trump is massing military forces in that country, which is kind of strange because he at first said that he was going to help the protesters there and he encouraged the protesters to continue protesting and then threatened Iran that if they killed any of these protesters that he would bomb Iran again. Yeah, he'd already bombed it once before on the nuclear facilities. And then all of a sudden, nothing happened. And Trump said that the reason for this was because Iran promised to stop executing these protesters. But at the same time, Trump is sending over this military armada. So nobody really knows what's going on over there. But here we go again with just military interventionism. And of course, combined with this military interventionism are the brutal sanctions against Iran. And I, as I've written for many, many years, these sanctions to me are just the epitome of evil. I mean, they target the civilian population of a country in the hopes of getting a regime change or some drastic change in policy. And that's just horrible. I mean, horrible. Regardless of Iran's economic system, the fact is that in these countries where the government plays a heavy-handed role in the economy, people are still able to eke out a living. There's some degree of relative prosperity, nothing like we have in the United States, of course. But boy, when sanctions hit a country, U.S. sanctions, they're devastating for the citizenry. And the Iranian people have been thrown into just abject poverty. And so you've got that kind of interventionism, which is what really was motivating the economic chaos that the sanctions were causing, was part of what was motivating the protests.
Right.
And then the interventionists in the U.S. government see this as a great opportunity. I mean, they react with glee, like, "Oh, wow, this is great. This is great. We're going to see the fall of the Iranian regime." And in the context of all this, we really have to remember why this is so. And that's the original U.S. interventionism in 1953 when the CIA ousted the democratically elected prime minister of the country, Mohammad Mossadegh, in order to help out British oil interests. That sounds familiar. Oil. And so they get the Shah of Iran, which was a brutal dictator, brutal, and that's what motivates the Iranian Revolution. People don't revolt lightly against a brutal dictator because they know they're likely to get killed in a revolution. And I mean, that's what's happened right now with people trying to revolt or at least protest against the Iranian regime, but they don't get their democratic system back. They get this Ayatollah system that arguably is as bad, if not worse, than the Shah's regime that the U.S. installed. So you've got to, I mean, I feel really bad for the Iranian people when Trump says it, and the mainstream media says Iran's our adversary, our rival, our opponent. I don't accept that at all. My rival, my opponent is the U.S. government. They are the ones that have caused so much death and destruction around the world and destroyed our liberty here at home. I mean, if you get caught violating sanctions to Iran, you get sent to a federal penitentiary. You're not free to spend your money the way you want in this country. And it's the same with Cuba. So that's what I mean by here we go again, more interventionism. And of course, they never accept the failure of their interventionism. Sometimes there's a delayed reaction, like with the Iranian situation. But you don't ever hear them saying, well, we really need to reevaluate our original intervention. Instead, their whole history starts with 1979, the Iranian Revolution, when really it starts in 53. My whole point about this is that the US government's really responsible for what's going on in Iran, and they're only just making it worse with threats of military intervention, bombings, more sanctions, and the like. What do you think?
Well, I agree. It goes back a lot further than 1979 or Biden or Trump or all of them being in office more recently. But I think, you said that they never admit their mistakes. And in one sense, within the interventionist mindset, and in spite of what we view as his craziness in many ways, Trump is trying to learn from the mistakes of the failures of U.S. interventionism in the past. And learning from the mistakes means not to not intervene, but how to intervene with minimizing the likelihood of similar dire consequences for the U.S. For instance, you in the first bombing of Iran last year, then with the kidnapping of Maduro in Venezuela, and now with this renewed threat against Iran, with this flotilla arriving in near the Persian Gulf. What clearly the Trump administration wants to do is to mold other countries' policies in directions that the U.S. government wants, but not have situations like Afghanistan or Iraq or what the U.S. European intervention led to in Libya, where you more directly intervene yourself and attempt to introduce regime change consciously, which Afghanistan attempted to do, Iraq attempted to do, and the Europeans and the United States attempted to do in Libya. That results either a disintegration of the society or getting yourself militarily sucked in to a situation in which your combat soldiers end up in 20-year wars with ignominious defeat anyway at the end. So what Trump is trying to do, and I think he's introduced this model first with just bombing Iran, but now with Venezuela for sure. In spite of the rhetoric, uh, what you want to do is you don't want to overthrow the regime because that destabilizes the situation. 20 years after Gaddafi being killed in Libya, the country is still broken up into a civil war among Libyan tribal factions. You don't want to militarily self-intervene because that involves God knows what end game after Afghanistan and Iraq. So what you do, you try to bend members of the regime that you're in opposition with, bend them into introducing policies and conforming their domestic politics to what you want. Basically ruling by puppet rather than direct control. So they don't care if democracy ever comes again to Venezuela. They use that rhetoric because Trump really doesn't care. What they want is people who are pliable in charge who does what Washington wants. And that's what they've done. Look what we did with Maduro. Do you want to end up dead like him? Or kidnapped like him? Do you want to end up dead? Do you want to be brought to the United States in chains? Do you want that fate? Do we want to maybe not kidnap you, just have assassins or a bombing run kill you? So you just bend the people in that regime to realign their policy to fit what you want. And that's what they're trying to do with Iran. All the rhetoric about, oh, if you kill the demonstrators in mass numbers, the United States will fall down on your head, implying kidnapping or assassination. And it's clear that Trump isn't going to go for that per se if he doesn't have to. That is kidnapping again, because that's more logistically difficult. What he would just do is he would threaten to use military sanctions, bombing runs of military facilities or infrastructure, military infrastructure, to make them be compliant within a corridor of acceptability to what the Trump administration wants. That's what they mean by learning from history. You don't get into another Afghanistan or Iraq, and you don't have to overthrow the regime. You just get rid of the head of the snake and then use other members of the government who get intimidated and fearful to just be your compliant puppet. And that's what they're hoping they can do with get the Iranians to accept the ending of their nuclear program, and then to pressure them to stop giving any aid, comfort, or support to what they view as terrorists and other type of radical organizations in the Middle East.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, the proof positive is Venezuela. I mean, Richard, I find it absolutely shocking that Trump and the national security establishment, clearly the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA are on board with this. It may even be them running the show. But for them to be partnering with a socialist communist regime is just astounding to me. I mean, the whole Cold War was the anti-communist crusade, and this is a narco-terrorist regime. That's not my label. That's the US government's label. And it wasn't just Maduro. It wasn't just they had this single solitary guy at the top that was supposedly engaged in terrorism and drug dealing. The whole regime was called a narco-terrorist regime. In fact, the director, the minister of the interior, Diosdado Cabello, who's a brutal, ruthless guy. I mean, this is the guy that has been rounding up people, abusing them, and so forth. I mean, this guy is, you don't want to cross him. He's still in charge of the ministry there, and he's under criminal indictment also. Now, have they asked Delcy Rodriguez to extradite him like they've done with Mexico's president? Extradite all those drug dealers or accused drug dealers? No, not as far as I can see. And she herself, Delcy Rodriguez, she's never been elected. I mean, this is a totally illegitimate regime. They lost that election. And she's been a long time target of the DEA for drug dealing. So here the US government is partnering with this regime because it's stable. And the reason it's stable is because they've got the national security establishment that is still in place. They
Correct.
figure that if they put the opposition in charge or have an election, there'll be instability
Yes.
because of the national security establishment. But where are the moral scruples in all this? They're non-existent, Richard. There is no guiding moral principle here at all.
You see, the thing is that, well, in one level, throughout the Cold War, there were ambiguous moral principles. It would be, whether you agree with their method, their conception, there was a sense upon, at least in my opinion, a variety of policymakers in the US government in the post-war period that they believed that communism was bad, that it was a tyrannical system. And they did a lot of dances with regional devils around the earth. But at the end of the day, they believed that opposing communism was right. It's not a matter of whether they chose the right means. They believed that communism was evil and wrong, and it should be opposed. Maybe the wrong ways in a foreign policy agenda, but they believed that. But in the process of everyday global politics, they danced with a lot of regional and local devils precisely because he may be an authoritarian, but he's our authoritarian in the Cold War struggle. So there was always that realpolitik, if you will, beneath the surface. With Trump, there's only realpolitik. He doesn't give a damn. There is no morality play in his mind. Everything is just a deal. The United States is a company, and I'm the CEO. I have to make sure that our company is economically prosperous, has the resources for capital investment, so we stay ahead of all of our global competitors and rivals in the game of market share and profits, as reflected in making America economically great again. Now, in this game, you just cut deals. Sometimes they're rivals, sometimes they're just other companies on the side, but you'd rather having them in a deal with you as opposed to the other guy because you're in this transactional conflict with them. And that's the whole thing. So yeah, they're willing to work with anybody as long as America has the oil and America can then use the oil for its own political purposes. Suddenly, India, who Trump was bad mouthing, seems to say that it's going to either cut back or stop buying oil from Russia as part of the American oil sanctions against Russia. And the tariffs are suddenly lowered dramatically down to 18% from 50%. Has that in any way changed what the Indian government does domestically? Does it overcome their corruption and statist policies? No, because Trump doesn't care. It's just your company country versus that company country. And you cut deals here, you undercut someone else there, you teach someone else a lesson to get them in line, bully them enough. So even if you can't really get him to do what you want, others get terrorized to fall into line in other deals you're trying to make. And that's how he operates. When he says he's devoted his life to making deals, he's a real estate owner and builder. That's it. That's how he views Greenland. It's just a real estate deal. What's the problem? Tell me your price, and it's mine to then have as part of my properties. What's the deal? And as a consequence, you don't even get the rhetoric, however cynical, however hypocritical, however a, a, attempted in the wrong policies. You don't even get the rhetoric anymore because he doesn't care. He doesn't feel that that's the game. The world is ruled by power, and all you have are the conflicts between power centers. And either we have the power and the control or they do, and everything else is just talk.
Well, in the process, what we know what the impact is on foreign countries. I mean, it's been devastating for the Iranian people. It's been devastating for the Cuban people, and these regimes, it gives them an out because they can blame the economic crisis on the sanctions. This is all caused by the U.S. government, not by our economic policies. This is especially true in Cuba, where, okay, you've got this socialist system. Clearly, that's going to bring lower standards of living. But people still can, like I said earlier, eke out a living, maybe even get relatively prosperous within this system. But then the U.S. puts the embargo on, or sanctions in Venezuela, or sanctions on Iran or in Russia. It gives the regime the opportunity to blame the economic crisis on the sanctions. I mean, it's totally counterproductive. But I also think Americans give short shrift to the impact on themselves of this policy of interventionism. For example, if an American goes to Cuba and spends money there without permission, if he's got permission, it's okay. It's like a little serf on the plantation. You ask your daddy for permission or your mommy, and you can go to Cuba. But if you go there without permission and you spend money there, you will be indicted and convicted and incarcerated on your return. They will put you in jail. How is that possibly reconcilable with the principles of economic freedom? It's just, it boggles the mind. Or like take these sanctions. I find it fascinating that the U.S. puts sanctions on Iran, and they expect the whole world to comply with their sanctions. Well, why aren't these just sanctions imposed on the American people? You can't trade with Iran. I mean, that was the way the embargo against Cuba started out. It's illegal for Americans to trade with Cuba. You can't sell food there anymore. Uh, but they gradually extended to the world. It's like the empire. And so if somebody trades with China without official permission, or Iran or whatever, they get indicted over here. And then there's for the American side, there's there's the destruction of economic liberty, the ability to travel and trade wherever you want, and Americans just come to accept that as normal. That's part of freedom, Jacob. That we get punished if we travel somewhere, spend money without permission. But there's these killings too. When there's people that were cheering this killing of these supposed drug dealers in these little boats, which is just totally bizarre because a drug offense is not a death penalty offense. And the fact that they were just killing these people, I find it so shocking, so unbelievably shocking. And I find it shocking that there were a lot of people in this country that did not find it shocking. I heard one guy say, "Oh, I don't care if they're killing a bunch of drug dealers." Well, they haven't been convicted of drug dealing. They haven't been convicted of anything. We don't know what they were doing there. That's what a trial is about. And a drug offense is a criminal offense. It requires due process, but not when the military is involved. Well, what Americans don't realize is that this power to kill extends to them. That if they can kill narco terrorists anywhere in the world because the whole world is this global empire, they can kill Americans. We can see it there in Minneapolis. They kill Americans. They don't need to worry about it. They get away with it. And this is the kind of system we now live under. This is what's defined as freedom in America. The living under a system where the government has the omnipotent power to kill people. That to me is just shocking and incredible.
Well,
Not to even mention this punish you for trading or traveling wherever you go.
I think we have to recall that this is a sentiment that is nothing new and is captured in movies. There's long been an attitude, especially, though not exclusively, but especially among conservatives. Damn it, those liberals are so interested in defending those criminals that they'll use a technicality to get them off. Maybe some of the viewers or listeners will remember Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry. And don't get me wrong, I love Clint Eastwood movies. His westerns, I'm a big fan of those. I grew up with them. But there's Dirty Harry, and this wacko guy kidnaps this girl and has buried her alive. And he tracks him down into a stadium, and he knocks him down, and he wants him to tell where has he buried this girl. Because supposedly she has only so many hours of oxygen in this hole that he's put her in. And Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry, starts putting his foot on a bullet wound in the guy's leg. Obviously imposing agony. And the guy said, "I have rights. I have rights." Dirty Harry keeps pushing down until obviously, the blanks out, but obviously he is told where she's buried. And of course, by the time they reach her, she's dead. But you see, you're supposed to be rooting for Clint Eastwood, for Dirty Harry. This is a bad man. He has taken an innocent young girl and literally condemned her to death by burying her in a hole in the ground with only so much oxygen. What kind of technicality of rights when her life is at stake? An innocent young girl. Now, that idea is part of the family of policies and criticisms of policies that becomes what you're talking about. What do you care if these people in little boats, and why would they even be out in those boats, leaving Venezuela, heading north in the Caribbean, if it wasn't to be carrying drugs? I mean, isn't that the primary product that Venezuela produces other than oil? And they must be only doing it because they work for these cartels of which Maduro has been the head. And well, the government just says so. That's what they have the ships there for, to protect us from that. So what's the problem? But it's the same thing. Are you going to allow a criminal to get away with a technicality?
Yeah, well, keep in mind that Duterte in the Philippines, he's under indictment for doing this, or
Yes.
supposedly doing this. The International Criminal Court is accusing him of shooting, assassinating, executing suspected drug dealers without due process, without trials. And it's what you were talking about with Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry, is that we don't need no stinking trial. We know who's guilty. And that was what their attitude was with these people in this boats. We know
Yes,
that they were smuggling
exactly.
drugs. We don't need no
Exactly.
stinking trial. It's just fascinating. But let's just talk about the ideal, because the ideal of our 19th century American ancestors was really a radical idea, is that there's a lot of monsters in the world. This is John Quincy Adams' famous 4th of July. What was it, 1820? I forget what year. Uh,
1830s, I think.
well, somewhere in there, where in search of monsters to destroy. And if you haven't read it, not you, Richard, but if our listeners haven't read it, it's worth reading. It was just such a radical philosophy. First of all, they didn't have a national security state, so they didn't really have the military means of going abroad and intervening. But Quincy Adams says our government does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. There's a lot of monsters, dictators, brutes, torturers, killers, whatever, all around the world, famines. But our government's not going to go abroad and slay those monsters. But if you can get out, you have a place that you can come. We won't deport you. We won't force you back to die in your country of origin. There's a sanctuary, in other words. That to me was a radical notion, but it was a beautiful notion. It was consistent with free market principles and moral principles and limited government principles. That to me is what we ought to be aiming for today, and use this crisis as a way to cause people to do some reevaluating, Richard. And by the way, as a digression, I'm going to start a new podcast series this week called "The Evil Within," where I'm going to be talking about evil systems within our own government that need to be eradicated if we're going to get this country back on the right track.
Well, I think another element here, picking up what you were saying, is that, you're saying, "Well, why aren't more people upset with, don't they realize that when the US government imposes sanctions against another country, they're really imposing against Americans because those Americans can't trade with those countries or travel?" I think a good part of the reason why there isn't much of an uproar, how many people would want to go to North Korea? How many Americans are just dying to go on a vacation to Iran? Are there Americans of Persian descent who have relatives there or would like to go for visits? Yes. But as a percentage of the US population who feel any personal and direct impact from sanctions, there's very few. So it doesn't touch their lives. The same thing is that you can say, well, if these sanctions are imposed on other countries, trade is embargoed, imports are not allowed, Americans are not allowed to export to those countries. Yes, through a whole chain of relationships, that may result in slightly higher prices or fewer availabilities of things, Persian rugs coming into the United States. But the impact in general is so marginal for most Americans in a product availability and a higher price for a rug that it doesn't affect most Americans. And it's just an abstract thing that the government just seems to be doing the right thing because of something bad happening abroad. And since it seems to have no cost on me in any meaningful way, well, then why should I be against the America, quote, doing the right thing in another part of the world?
I completely agree with you. As you know, I'm Catholic, and in the Catholic religion, there's a concept called the well-formed conscience. And I think the American conscience, when it comes to these kind of areas, generally speaking, is not well formed at all. I think it's been stultified, where people just render their conscience into Caesar. That I let them decide these things. If they decide that these supposed drug dealers need to be killed, I defer to them. If they decide that sanctions need to be imposed on the Iranian people, I defer to them. In other words, there's no exercise of conscience here of like, my gosh, I'm a citizen in a government that's doing some really bad things out there, evil things, immoral things. And I think that's one way out of this is that if we can somehow or another cause people to start searching within in order to find the solution to getting this country back on the right track. That's what we need to be doing.
Yeah, I agree. Uh, but people only go out on the streets when something emotionally really upsets them or it has an impact on them. I mean, how did these demonstrations in Iran begin? It's because not just any sanction effects, but the ineptness, the corruption, the planning stupidities of the Iranian government within Iran would bring about such distortions and shortages and scarcities and hardships on standard of living that first merchants were demonstrating we can't get products, the taxes are too high, and then students start saying, why can't we listen to the music we want? Why can't we read a book or watch international television the way we want, or not have to dress a certain way that the theocratic government imposes on us? And it snowballs like this. But it really has to start finally reaching catalysts of impacting people's lives or in some corner of their life that now is noticeable and important to them before they'll actually start thinking about what the government is doing wrong, and I have to pay attention, not just pay attention, but I have to be willing to do something. Let me just sort of extrapolate to these goings on in Minneapolis. Now, on the one hand, if I were to sit down with a large majority of those who have been demonstrating on the streets against ICE and talking not about the immigration issue itself. But well, why are you out here? What do you think is wrong with the American government? What is wrong with the American society that has upset you? Vast majority of them, I regret to would say it for reasons that are not my own. They would be defined as politics that we usually think of as, quote, progressive, socialist on the left. In other words, what their complaints against the government are often ideological complaints of which I have no sympathy for. But the fact is that this issue has touched them, and it just happens to be an issue that I'm generally in sympathy with. But this has impacted that they feel this deep injustice with people in their communities and the outrageousness of the behavior of federal agents by a president that they detest. And they're willing to go out and confront. And fortunately, though no less tragically, it has caused the death of two people and the injuring of a third. But unless people are aroused because it impacts them economically or touches some deep philosophic or theological reason, it's very difficult to reach those points at which regime opposition uh, can threaten the regime itself.
Well, that's why I keep bringing up the point about conscience, is that people can see the wrongfulness of shooting a guy in the back 10 times
Oh,
when you
yeah.
already have him down. But he's an American citizen. You see, there's outrage because there's great value that's placed on the life of an American citizen. Well, what we need is that same degree of conscience of this is wrong. You don't shoot somebody in the back when you hold him down, has got to be transmitted to the idea that all human life is valuable, equally valuable. And so when they're killing people on the high seas who are suspected of being drug dealers, there's got to be that same conscience, exercise of conscience that says, this is wrong. Even if they're not American citizens, this is wrong. Your sanctions against the people of Iran that is throwing them into poverty and desperation, and Cuba, poverty and desperation and death by starvation and illness, like they did with Iraq, the Iraqi people. That's when you know we're on the verge of a real transformation in this country, when conscience applies across the board.
I'll just uh, add to that. Um, Around the middle of the 1880s, the British philosopher, uh, historian, most importantly, sociologist Herbert Spencer was making a tour of the United States. And at the end, towards the end of the tour, he was interviewed by an American reporter. And as part of the exchange, uh, Herbert Spencer sort of ends the interview by saying, uh, the preservation of a free society requires a high character of an individual who would neither want to enslave others nor would want others to enslave him. And in great and small issues is outraged with the violation of any individual's rights, just as he would want others to be outraged by a violation of his own. The British and American people have strove for that ideal, but unfortunately, neither of us have yet fully attained it.
Okay. On that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you, y'all, for tuning in. Again, thank you for your support of FFF. Richard, thank you for the nice conversation, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.